Wow. I'll make this short because I know how difficult it is to stand up, especially when you have a hip problem or a knee problem. So thank you for getting the microphone to work. I am just blown away that some of you would take time from your busy schedule to come here and to support the sale of this book. I don't really consider myself an author, even though I am now. I want you to know that we have sold approximately 45,000 of these little books. And you're going to make that bump up a little bit tonight, so it's pretty exciting. I wrote the book to be a legacy for my grandchildren. And frankly, I didn't really believe anybody else would want to read it. And what I've found is that the lessons contained in the book are really needed in the culture we have today in our country, because it's sort of a culture of anything goes. And those old-fashioned values of a work ethic and of doing the right thing, and the things that you and I grew up with our parents teaching us, that doesn't happen as often as it did in our day. I received a phone call recently from a mother, and she somehow found my number. And she said, Mo, do you have a study guide that goes with the book? And I said, yes, you can download it from moanderson.com. And when we republish the book, when we do another printing, I plan to put that study guide in the back of the book. So she formed a little group with her son, who was 12, and some other children, I guess, in the neighborhood. And she said that the chapter entitled "Do the Right Thing" was the one she started with this group of children. So I want to share with you quickly this evening, one of the things that tested my resolve to do the right thing. You see, in the early 1990s, right before the launch of the Keller Williams Oklahoma region, Richard and I were still struggling to overcome our financial loss. I don't know if any of you were affected by the downturn in the economy in the late 80s. Oh my goodness. But let me tell you, we were. And we had saved money and worked hard for years and years and years. And here we find ourselves at the age of 54, starting all over again. And the losses were huge. We had lost all of our savings. We had lost all of our investments because we were diversified in all of the wrong things. Oil, you know what happened in the late 80s. The price went down to $8 a barrel. We also lost a lot of the subdivisions and the developments that we were involved in. And we had partners who had millions and millions of dollars in Penn Square Bank, and they were left with $100,000. We were not in that bank, so we had the joy of paying off their debt. And your money goes quickly when you're paying off everybody else's debt. Dave Jenks, who was the divisional president of a large group of states for Century 21, approached me. Now remember, I'm broke. Richard and I are broke. We're starting over. He approaches me and he says, Mo, I want you to come and run my region. It consisted, I think, if I remember right, of 4 states. He said, if you will do this, I'll pay you a huge salary. I will pay you bonuses. And when I saw how he structured the bonuses, I absolutely knew I could hit those goals and I would earn those bonuses. And then he had benefits out the kazoo. Eye insurance, toe insurance, body insurance. I mean, you name it, and he had it. Now, I want you to know that his offer really enticed me because I saw it as security for our family, and I saw it as the path to freedom from the $1.3 million worth of debt we had. Now, to some of you, $1 million in debt doesn't seem like a lot of money. But when you're a tenant farmer's daughter, it's a whole lot of money. However, by the time I received this telephone call with this fabulous offer that could get us out of financial problems, I want you to know that a man named Gary Keller had already agreed to let me open the Keller-Williams, Oklahoma region for no salary, no bonuses, and no benefits. What a deal. You see, his venture was strictly an entrepreneurial venture. The other one was a job. Now, I had finally learned that it's really good to own businesses because you can make money while you sleep if you own a business. And being a tenant farmer's daughter, I thought that was pretty cool. So I brought my dilemma to Richard, and I said, my husband, and I said, Richard, what do you think I should do? And he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to give you any advice. This is a decision that you have to make on your own. Well, after a lot of thought and a lot of prayer, I made my decision. And I called Dave Jenks, and I explained to him that I already had an agreement with Gary Keller, and that my heart really was to honor that agreement. And he said, well, have you signed any documents? And I said, well, no, because Gary doesn't even have any documents at this point. But let me tell you what, Dave, we shook hands. And my dad taught me that a handshake was as powerful and as honorable as a contract. So after the call, I went to Richard and I said, did I do the right thing? And he smiled and he said, you did exactly what I knew you would do. You kept your commitment. I believe that I had passed a test of character. So what are we teaching our children and our grandchildren today about commitment, about a handshake, about honoring our word? And I honestly believe that the Lord blessed me with a life of great abundance for doing the right thing, because the Oklahoma region prospered and it grew and it grew. And I became the first CEO of Keller-Williams Realty International. And under my tenure, we grew from 1,800 agents to 50,000 agents. And today we have 189,000 agents. Now, when I went to Austin to help Gary grow this company, he asked if I would move, and I said, yes, I'll move on the condition that you give me a small salary and X% ownership of the company. When I arrived in Austin, I realized I had not struck a very good deal because the company was really struggling financially, and there were many months when it couldn't pay me that little bitty salary, and it couldn't pay him. But the other lesson my father and my mother had taught me was perseverance and tenacity. And because I knew that I had X amount of ownership in that company, I was far more determined to make it work. Well, folks, I'm happy to tell you I struck a really good deal. It just took it a while to develop. Now, let's talk about tenacity for a minute. It's another chapter in the book. It's called Keep the Faith and Never, Never, Never Quit. Growing up on that tenant farm, we often had hailstorms and rain and tornadoes. And when those storms hit, they usually destroyed the crop. Now, most of you know what a sharecropper is. You know what a tenant farmer is. And that's simply where we give to the landlord a third of the crop. It takes another third of the crop to be able to plant another crop. And if we're lucky and there's anything left over, we get what's left over. And I want you to know that our only source of food and income was from the crop. And in those days, there was no crop insurance. And the greatest lesson I learned about tenacity was watching my father and my mother when the storms destroyed our crops. I can remember as a child wearing my feed sack dresses that I was so proud of. And we would open the door of the cellar, that dark, cobwebbed cellar, with those beautiful jars of vegetables and fruits that my mother canned. And we would look out after the storm and just pray that the wheat was not destroyed. 3 years in a row, the storms destroyed the crops. Talk about tenacity. What an example my father was, because he would go get a job troweling cement. Now, I don't know if you know what that is, but it is a back-breaking job, and it's very difficult. And he would trowel enough cement that he would earn enough for food. And I never knew if I would have new shoes, because mine always had holes in the soles, or if we'd have enough money to buy the big, cheap tablet. And most of you in this room are too young to know what a big, cheap tablet is. But it was really, really cool. And so there was the example for me to watch as a child. The man who wouldn't give up. The man who kept on going regardless of what would happen. So let me pose a question to you tonight. What kind of an example are you to your grandchildren or your children when it comes to hanging in in there and absolutely not quitting, because you see, the only people who fail are the people who quit. The rest of us simply fail forward, and we learn from our mistakes and move on. But those who quit actually fail. And people will look at the home I live in, or they'll look at my pretty car, and they'll say, "Oh, Mo, she is so lucky." I want to kick them in the shin. It really has to do with tenacity and perseverance and the blessings from the good Lord above, because life has presented me with challenges so tough that I almost quit. But I never said quit in the 70s when I launched my real estate career, and if you know my story, I didn't start off with a bang. And I never said quit in the oil bust of the late 80s. And I never said quit when I was hired as CEO, had a teeny tiny staff, worked my fingers to the bone, had very little sleep, arrived at the office at 6 in the morning and worked until 2 o'clock in the evening. And I do have a trophy. It's called a pacemaker. To turn around that little fledgling company that is now today the largest real estate franchise company in the world. And I never said quit after 61 years of marriage, although I have to admit at times I thought about it. And I'm certain that you, like me, have had times when you were discouraged and you want to quit. But there were always stories that kept me going. Did you know that Beethoven, one of my favorite composers, was called a hopeless composer? Did you know that Colonel Sanders had 1,000 no's before he sold his chicken recipe? 1,000. And I have agents in our company who whine and complain when they get 3 or 4 no's. And I just tell them they only have 997 more to go. Did you know Einstein did not read until he was 4 years old, and he didn't speak until he was 4, and he didn't read until he was 7. And his teachers described him as mentally slow. But my favorite story that kept me going was about Fred Astaire. Now, I know you're too young to know who Fred Astaire is. But when he took his first Hollywood screen test, the memo from the testing director at MGM said, he can't act, he's slightly bald, he can dance a little bit. Now, he kept that memo over his fireplace his entire life. He kept it for the rest of his life to remind himself to never, never quit. You see, life consists of challenges. It never stops. Even when you're 81 like me, you still have challenges. And it's like living in a little dot. Man, it's uncomfortable. You don't like it when you lose all your money and you're in debt, 1.3 million. It's tough. But those little dots are interesting. Do you remember when you were a kid and you played connect the dots and you moved the pencil from number 1 dot to number 2 dot to 3 to 4 to 5 and so on, and when you were finished, what did you have? A picture. And it was so fun to see what the picture was when you connected the dots. And I want to encourage you to understand that in between the dots, sometimes there's a short period of sheer joy. But what I learned is you could have joy even when you're in one of those really uncomfortable dots. And I try to look deeper and not see each dot as a milestone, but to see God's hand in each event and in the transitions between those dots. For example, if I had not been raised in poverty, I may not have sought wealth, valued it, and been willing to share it. If my parents had not instilled a strong work ethic in me, I may not have stuck to the standards and been so willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. If Richard and I had not lost all of our money in the oil bust of the 1980s, I would not have started the real estate training company that led Gary Keller to accidentally find me, that lucky guy. You see, you don't see the big picture when you're living in each of those dots, and it's only distance, wisdom, and experience that are earned over the passage of your life that can really reveal the design of the picture. In closing, I want to read the last four paragraphs. Don't sweat it. In my book. Right now, I'm in this wonderful dot, the joy and richness of my senior years. I love to stroll through the gardens in our backyard at Stone Mill. I watch the birds from the park benches, then reach down to let the water of the little creek run through my fingers. And the water, like time, moves on, coursing to a destination further down the way. Fall will soon come to Oklahoma again, bringing a change of the leaves of the trees here. They will turn to beautiful shades of gold, red, and orange. And I can't help but feel the changing of seasons in my own life, too. Stone Mill is lovely during the daytime, but it has a special, special magic in the evening. And as I look out over the backyard, I remember what Will Rogers once said. One must wait until evening to see how splendid the day has been. I love looking back to see just how splendid all my days have been. The dots are so beautifully connected. What a joy-filled life it has been. Thank you, Lord. Thank you.